I wanted to introduce you now to Patrick Svitek, who is the primary political correspondent for the Texas Tribune, as well as Ann Temple Peters, who is the executive director of the Texas Ethics Commission. And hopefully we'll give you some insights into what her organization does so that you can find comparable ones in your state. And with that, I'll let Patrick take it away.
Awesome, thank you. As Ann said, my name is Patrick Svitek. I'm the primary political correspondent for the Texas Tribune here in Austin. I've been with them for several years now. And one of the things that I'm really interested in on the political beat here in Texas is campaign finance. So this was a really exciting opportunity to speak to you all about this. Texas is especially a really interesting state when it comes to campaign finance because there are no contribution limits like some other states. And so it really brings into relief when people have the opportunity to give as much as they want to, who the real big players are and where influence is concentrated. And so I just wanted to get that out of the way to begin with. Texas is an especially fun place to cover this. And I'm sure some of you who have experience, maybe even extensive experience with campaign finance reporting. And so some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, I'm sure you already know, but I figured I'd just kind of set the stage about why this kind of reporting matters. From a practical standpoint, campaign finance and fundraising is just a huge part of campaigning. Most candidates and campaigns you talk to will tell you that it's what their candidates spend the most time doing, hours and hours a day, making calls, attending events, all geared toward raising money. And obviously that money pays for things like TV ads, polling, all the important things and functions that go into a successful campaign. And it's also a metric by which candidates are judged by their opponents, by the media, other political observers. And so basically, as I wrote there, if you're not covering fundraising, campaign finance, you're not fully covering politics. And then on the accountability side of this, obviously, money can influence the decision-making of elected officials. And the way I think about this sometimes is, you have kind of hard influence, and sometimes as a reporter, you're fortunate enough to find out that there's an actual quid pro quo that happened, that a elected official is doing a favor for a donor, that you can draw a really straight line between a donation or a donor's influence in an official act. But oftentimes what I found in my reporting is it's more about what I would call the soft influence of it all. And that's that, big donors tend to get access to politicians that normal people, average voters do not. And that access comes in different forms of communication, whether it's a personal relationship, being able to pick up their cell phone and call an elected official, which I know there are a number of donors here in Texas that could probably get through to the governor or the lieutenant governor on his cell phone or pretty easily. Obviously, the average voter can't call Greg Abbott, Ken Paxton, Dan Patrick on their cell phone out of the blue. And so that's the kind of influence that I would put under the soft influence umbrella that I think is often more what happens when we talk about the corrupting influence of big money or any concerns that could be raised about the influence of big money in politics. And so those are the two things that I think about when I think about why this reporting matters. Some of the basics for campaign finance reporting, and like I said, I'm sure some of you already know this, but I figured I'd just break it down for some people who maybe haven't done this kind of reporting before, is first understanding the different levels of government at which campaign finance reporting is required. So for federal races, like for the US House, for US Senate, you have the Federal Election Commission. For state elections here in Texas, and it's similar in other states, you have a state level campaign finance authority or reporting authority. Here it's the Texas Ethics Commission, and so this is for elections for statewide offices like governor, for state legislative races, for the state house, the state senate. The Texas Ethics Commission is the body that candidates submit their reports to and is responsible for making those reports public once they're submitted. And then in Texas, we have obviously there's campaign finance reporting in local races, like for mayoral races, city council races, county commissioner races, and that's a little more varied. You obviously have to go to the individual local government and figure out the way in which they disclose that. And then I think it's also, and I may get to this later, also important to understand the way that rules are different at those different levels of government as it relates to campaign finance. The big one here in Texas, obviously, is that in federal elections inside Texas, they're subject to federal contribution limits, which I think right now is a $2,900 check to a candidate from an individual per election in the 2-year period. And then at the state level, so in like a governor's race in Texas, there are no limits. You could write a $1 million check. You could write a $10 million check. So that's obviously the one big difference between the campaign finance rules at the federal and state level in Texas. And then it's always interesting too, and this is getting a little in the weeds, but the local elections in Texas can have even more different quirks. I know here in Austin, the campaign contribution limits are pretty low. Their campaign finance laws here probably reflect the more progressive government and politics of the city. Second point there is know the different kinds of entities that are reporting to these campaign finance authorities. So you have, and again, I'd break it down here between what I call hard money groups, like a candidate's, like their actual campaign account, their actual committee, and then soft money groups, which are like a political action committee that can spend on behalf of candidates and try to help them as a separate entity. And then outside this system, you have what you tend to hear about in politics as dark money groups, which are groups that generally do not have to disclose their donors, but can engage in politics in some ways. And I think most recently, the rise of the 501c4 nonprofit is an example of that. It's a nonprofit, and the 501c4 refers to the part of the tax code it's organized under. But groups like that are allowed to engage in politics as long as a majority of their activities are not related to politics. And that's obviously a very subjective way of looking at things. And so they're able to really skirt, I think, some of the at least spirit of campaign finance law by operating that way. And then also know the reporting periods and deadlines. And this can be a little overwhelming if you're a state level reporter and you're trying to cover federal elections in your state elections in your state, because at least here in Texas, the campaign finance reporting deadlines for state and federal elections don't always align. In fact, more often than not, they don't align. And so just make sure you understand how often does a campaign or one of these other entities we talked about have to disclose its finances? How does that reporting schedule change with an upcoming election? Obviously here in Texas, ahead of a primary runoff, ahead of the general election, I think maybe you could clarify when you speak, I think it's 8 days out and then 30 days out, candidates have to submit reports. And so ahead of those elections, there's a more accelerated reporting schedule. So just understand those reporting schedules and how they can differ at the federal and state levels. And of course, know the rules. Know about campaign contribution limits. As I said earlier, right now in a federal election, an individual person can give $2,900 to a candidate per election in the 2-year cycle. So in a state like Texas that has primary runoffs, that means someone can give to a candidate 3 times throughout the 2-year cycle, because you could have a primary is counted as one election, primary runoff is counted as another election, and then there's the general election. And so that's a kind of a unique wrinkle in terms of how that's implemented in Texas with the runoff system that we have. And then understand what third-party groups do and do not do, what they can do and what they can't do. So the biggest example is in federal elections, you have Super PACs, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about. They can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money to help a candidate as long as they're not coordinating with that candidate. And then understand what kind of contributions are totally off limits, like what are the big no-nos. In federal elections, corporations cannot give directly to candidates, but they can, as I point out, still have influence in elections. They can form political action committees that their employees contribute to. Those PACs can then give to candidates. And then also corporations can give unlimited amounts to Super PACs to help to spend on behalf of candidates, again, if they're not coordinating with said candidates. And I don't know if this presentation is going to be online or distributed afterward, but I just have a quick link there to the FEC page that kind of breaks this down, at least for federal elections, in a really helpful way. And then everyone wants to be competitive, obviously, in reporting on these things. And so there's a few websites that I really like that really make sure that you're getting up-to-the-minute information on campaign finance. And so one of the great tools the FEC makes available is called FEC Notify. And I'll make sure I'm not blow things up here, but I'll click into it so we can just take a quick look at it. But basically, you can create an account with this website, and you can select every kind of group, every kind of campaign you want. And anytime they issue a new filing, they file something new with the FEC, you get an email alert. And they're super fast, too. This is, I think, one of the best things the FEC has done for reporters in a very, very long time. Sometimes, I'll get an alert from this so quickly and tweet about it that a campaign will then text me and say, we literally just filed that. It's crazy how fast that system works. And so this is a really great tool, especially if you're waiting for a certain campaign finance report to drop, and it's taking really late. Sometimes these campaigns wait until the last minute of the day. And before this tool, you'd if you're like a nerd like me, you'd like stay up all night waiting for it. But now you can, check this campaign off in this system, and you'll get an email alert as soon as that report lands. So it's super helpful. There's also this great tool that ProPublica has called Itemizer that basically presents all the FEC information in just a much more visually digestible format. And so you can go on their homepage, and it has every campaign finance filing up to the minute that's been filed today, for example. And so you have a congressional candidate here that filed a statement of organization, it looks like, which is what you file when you first begin your run for office. You have a year-end report here that looks like it was amended. So this was maybe for the last quarter of last year. They had to go back and fix something. And you can scroll over and you can see all the receipts, the top line receipts number, spending number, and you can click right into it, and it shows you in a pretty digestible format who the top donors are, and all the kind of information. So again, this is all information that's available on the FEC website. ProPublica just has this really helpful tool where they organize it in just a much more visually digestible way. And then on Twitter, there are a number of accounts that are basically linked to the FEC website and tap into the FEC website to tweet real-time updates. And so this is if you're like a super junkie, but you can turn on push alerts for those accounts, and that's another way of getting up-to-the-minute information about filings. My favorite part of this whole process, too, is understanding how people circumvent the rules, not necessarily break the rules, but so much of campaign finance, if you talk to campaigns, is figuring out how to follow the letter of the law, but maybe not necessarily the spirit of the law. And I'm going to just throw out two examples here that I found in my reporting that have led to some fun stories. Super PACs, especially in recent years, try to put off donor disclosure for as long as possible. And they can do this by popping up in the final days before an election, and they structure themselves in a way where they don't have to disclose their donors until after an election. And it's technically all legal. And I pointed out that in 2018, Politico had a good kind of, I think actually did like a full project on this. Love that headline, by the way. But Politico really covered this pretty aggressively in 2018 when I think this was really on the rise. And I pointed out an example we had here in Texas in 2018 at the end of the US Senate race here in 2018 when Beto O'Rourke was really gaining on Ted Cruz, really seemed like victory was within reach for him. I think it was the second to last or the last weekend before the election. This Super PAC popped up out of nowhere with just kind of a vaguely good sounding name and went on TV in the state's biggest media markets, Dallas and Houston, spent millions of dollars on TV ads attacking Ted Cruz. And they popped up after the last possible moment that they'd have to disclose their donors. And this is what the Politico story covers, but I'm just pointing to it as a Texas example. And it turns out afterward, when they finally disclosed their donors, that it was almost entirely funded by Senate Majority PAC, which is the top Democratic super PAC in Washington, aligned with, at the time, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And obviously, they didn't want to create any problems for Beto O'Rourke because he was trying to run a very Texas-focused campaign against Ted Cruz in that race, and in his subsequent races, he's always tried to say, this is about the people of Texas. I don't want the president coming in to campaign for me. I don't want Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi here. And so if it got out before the election that basically Chuck Schumer's super PAC was helping him, it could have been a problem for him. And so that's just one example, obviously on the Democratic side, of a group utilizing this loophole to hold off disclosing their donors until after an election because it may be politically damaging. Also, another great example of how people circumvent campaign finance rules is what's called Redboxes, which is a way of kind of getting around the ban on coordination between candidates and super PACs. So like I said, super PACs and candidates, they cannot coordinate, but that word can have a very disputed definition. And so if congressional candidates want to de facto coordinate sometimes with super PACs, they just post on their website basically archives of talking points, photos, and videos that super PACs know they can go look at and use that for their ads. And so this is something you see a lot in I think, not a lot, but you see often enough in congressional campaigns. And it's all public, and so the candidates have plausible deniability. And my favorite example right now, and I don't know if they changed this since I did this last night, but Henry Cuellar is a moderate Democrat from Laredo. He's in a really tough re-election race right now. But if you go to his campaign website, and you see media center is literally outlined in red. And so if you're a consultant who works for a Super PAC, you see a tab literally outlined in red and you know exactly what that is. You click on media center and here you go. Basically, you've got like a campaign strategy memo right before you. They'll often use language like this: Democratic primary voters need to see, need to hear, and then they'll have B-roll that any Super PAC can use, and then image library. I don't mean to pick on Henry Cuellar. I just love this example because it's so in your face. It's media center is literally outlined in red. So that's another way I think that you can see and be aware of about how candidates sometimes try to get around at least the spirit of these rules. And then my final point I just wanted to make was, and I'm sure for some of you who've been covering this isn't the hottest take, but I think sometimes people think that money is a sensitive matter in politics sometimes, especially when you're talking with candidates about their money. But in my experience, as I said, it's a huge part of politics, and if you're a serious and credible campaign, you know that the good reporters are going to have questions about it, and that you should cooperate with them, you should work with them. So if you're looking at a report, something doesn't add up, don't be afraid to ask a campaign about it. I've had plenty of times when I've found what I believe to be an error in a report, and the campaign said, oh, thank you very much, we're going to file an amended report tomorrow. Sometimes they don't like that, and they freeze up, and like I say in the slide, they'll raise your suspicions even further. We just had a big example of something like this here in Texas ahead of our Attorney General primary. The incumbent Attorney General, Ken Paxton, his campaign finance reports weren't adding up. He was saying he raised X million dollars, but there weren't enough donors in the report basically to justify that top line number. And so there was, this is a Texas Tribune story. I know other reporters here in Austin covered it, but we all brought light to that, and ultimately he filed an amended report that revealed who those donors were and obviously put them out into the public domain for voters to understand. And then also, just as a political reporter, in this, sometimes some of this just comes with doing this for a long time. Understand what, for these different campaigns and different reporting periods, what's considered good, what's considered bad. Like I said, fundraising is a metric that a lot of people use to judge, candidates, like it or not, fair, fair or not fair, good for democracy or not good for democracy. So, for example, here in Texas, our governor is a, prolific fundraiser. And so, he often in the off election year has to disclose his fundraising for every 6 months, I think. And so, we're constantly thinking about what's a good number for him, what's a bad number for him, what does this say about his political standing in the state. And then just also get to know that, like, even within politics, there's a whole set of sources that are almost exclusively focused on fundraising. Get to know them, get to know the people who are, personally fundraisers, people who put together events, people who help connect candidates with donors. Get to know the donors themselves if you can. Sometimes really big donors, have individual aides that deal with the media, or at least are kind of their political Sherpas. And so if you can, make sure you're being very deliberate in your source building, getting to know those people. And then, like I said at the end, try to understand what motivates them. Obviously, some people, give at a very high level because they want access, they want to be part of the game. They want to, get the kind of access I said earlier that bypasses the kind of access the average voter can get. Some people have very deep ideological issues that drive them to give so much. Those are just a few examples, but the bottom line is get to know those folks who are involved in fundraising, involved in big money, and try to understand what motivates them. In a good faith effort, but at the end of the day, this isn't kind of a segment of accountability reporting, and keep in mind that, this is all about shining light on a part of politics that often happens in private, and that the end goal is to hold people accountable and bring more, sunshine to this part of politics. So I think that's my last slide, so I'm happy to take any questions that you have.
Hi, I'm Carmen. I work for the Oklahoman in Oklahoma City. Dark money and 501c4s is becoming a huge thing in our governor's race this year. I mean, it's been a thing before, but I struggle with, I know this is the intent, that they don't want you to know who is funding them, but do you have any tips to find out more on who is funding them, or do you really just have to wait until they, file tax forms with the IRS?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are sometimes individuals that are associated on paperwork with 501c4s, whether I think they have to name a president sometimes, or like a board, a treasurer. I obviously start with those people. Obviously, those people don't want to talk sometimes. Oftentimes, they don't want to talk. The whole, as you pointed out, the whole idea is not to really share, or to share as little as possible. Sometimes I look to see who have been the biggest disclosed donors for those candidates that they're benefiting in the past. Because sometimes, people who may be fueling those kinds of dark money groups maybe gave publicly in the past and at a high level and found out it was not the right route to go. Maybe they didn't like the public scrutiny that came with it. They didn't like the damage it may have done to them politically in their professional or social circles. And so, sometimes I think it's I don't want to call it easy, but it does make sense to go back and look at who are the previous disclosed donors, who gave to the PACs or the Super PACs or the actual campaigns that are now, that gave to these candidates that are now benefiting from dark money. So that's how I think about it. But it's tough. It is really tough because you really have to, the whole system is set up, at least the way that they're using this system, is oriented toward, avoiding as much public attention as possible.
Hi, Joseph Bustos with the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina. You mentioned there's no limits to how much people could donate, but is there a minimum number where you actually have to report who actually has given the money?
Here in Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is, a point at which in Texas you have to itemize the donation. There's a certain threshold. I want to say it's around $100. I don't want to keep looking at the TC person, but
190 now. It's been adjusted for inflation.
190, and so there is a threshold once someone gives an aggregate, I think, per election, after which they have to, have their identifying information disclosed, like their name, occupation, where they're from in Texas or outside Texas. So yeah, there is a threshold that triggers disclosure. Like she says, 190.
Okay, my name's Ann Temple Peters. I'm the executive director of the Texas Ethics Commission. A lot of what I'm going to give you is going to be Texas specific, but it will hopefully sort of make you aware of kind of what you're looking at and what you need to be thinking about and trying to find. Okay, so just what I'm going to talk about just briefly about who the agency is, then about accessing the campaign finance reports, the lobby reports, talk about when the reports are available. I'm also going to mention what isn't on our website and talk a little bit about sworn complaints, because that's important, because we have a system where things are confidential up until a certain point in the process. And so that's something that you might have to be aware of, that there's information out there that is actually confidential and you can't get. Again, briefly, Texas Ethics Commission, it's kind of a rare animal in our state government in that it has an even number of commissioners. That means they have to get consensus. There's multiple appointing entities and from nominees from each political party. So in that 8-member commission, it's going to be 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, and then I just want to mention how small our staff is. So that's 26 people. You know how big Texas is. When I say 8 lawyers, that actually counts me. So, and then the stuff that I'm going to show you, we've got 4 IT professionals who are trying to run this. So bear with us if things are not, if things go down. We're doing our best with the few people that we have. Okay, so what we have on our website, as you can see from that drop-down search menu, and the things that I'm going to discuss are the campaign finance reports, the lobby registration and activity reports, and the sworn complaints, because there is some sworn complaint information, even though up until a certain point, all the information on sworn complaints is confidential. So we've got a lot of stuff that I think is pretty cool about the campaign finance reports. So if you were looking for them, this is where you would see. These are the things that you would see. Now, the database of campaign finance reports, you can download the whole database. And then that bar that says the CSV record layouts, that's going to be a page that takes you to information that tells you, what the files are, what the fields are, what all that information is describing, so you can just go through that yourself. The one thing that you can't get online is donor addresses. So we have that information. It's public. It's not online. But other than that, it's all there. Also, there are simple searches and advanced searches. It just depends on what you're looking to find. So if you want to find a particular person's particular report, so you want to see the last report or something filed by this particular candidate or this or a political committee, you can have the name of the committee, you can have the name of their campaign treasurer. Maybe you know their acronym. So all of these things you can search, and then when you search that, it pulls up a list of people with that name, and then it's clickable. Then you click it, immediately pulls you to the most recently filed reports, and then you can kind of scroll through and go back. But it defaults to thinking that you're looking for the most recent report, and then you can either pull the data in a spreadsheet, or you can just see a PDF of what the report actually looks like. So there are some options there when you find that. And then the advanced search, it's a little weirder, it's dynamic. So once you start choosing fields, then it populates with more. So it says at least one item in purple. Well, you've got to select some things first before that purple starts to light up. So it's dynamic, and it tells you what you have to search. And the reason that you would do this is if you were looking, say, for contributions made by a certain person to any candidate in a certain time period. That's the sort of thing that you can find with the advanced search. So we do have a lot of searching capabilities, especially for campaign finance, and they are all online. The ones that are filed with the Ethics Commission. And then we do have also a lot of information on lobbyists. Now we have registration and activities reports. How it works, the background is that if a person engages in what's defined as lobbying, and they have to meet a certain threshold where they're compensated or whether they make expenditures to directly communicate with a member of the executive or administrative branch of government to influence legislation or administrative action. That's the definition of lobbying. Once they've met those thresholds, then they have to register. And then registration triggers the reporting requirements. And generally, the registration is annual. The activity reports are monthly unless they only do just a little bit. And then they can file annually. So there's a lot of reports here. And then some of these lists on the left-hand side, there's some interesting things there, like the lobby expenditures. It just groups them all. It gives you aggregate totals. So if you want to see, how much was spent on legislators in this particular year, you can pull out those totals pretty easily. So sometimes the context is important as well. So you can get that aggregate information. It can kind of tell you whether something is considered a lot in the area. So again, there might be that sort of thing that you're looking for. Okay, when are new reports posted? So we don't have anything cool where we immediately alert you. And I didn't mention we're small and we're just trying our best. But if you know the filing schedules, which Patrick already mentioned, then you're going to know when those reports are going to start showing up. And statutorily, we've got 2 days to post them. So you're going to see them within 2 days. And so if you go 3 days later and you don't see somebody's report, that means they haven't filed it yet. So you're looking at a late report, and that's kind of how you know. But if you're aware of the filing deadlines, you're going to know when to be looking. I'm also going to mention what we don't have on our website, because we have a wealth of information, but we do not have reports filed with local governments. We do have links to some local governments. So some of the counties and some cities, and I think one school district has given us a link that we've posted. So if you go to our website and then you look under, like local, you can get a link to it. We have nothing to do with it. We're not, vouching for anything, but it's just there for helpfulness. But most local governments don't actually have this. You're just going to have to go into their office and find it on paper. And a lot of them do paper filings, but there's such a vast continuum of who you're going to be dealing with as far as resources and sophistication, and especially in a state like Texas, where you have Harris County with I don't know how many million people they have now, and you also have these counties and municipalities that have maybe dozens of people. So there's that vast continuum of sophistication. So for the big ones, we do have a link, and you can go look at that. And these would be people running for local offices. So if it's an office of the state government, it comes to us. If it's a political committee that's a general purpose political committee, that means that they're involved in a lot of different races and things like that, they're going to file with us. If it's a specific political committee, it's a specific purpose political committee for like one race, that's a local race, they're going to file locally, and of course the local officers. So if you're running for city council, you file with the city. If you're running for school board, then you're filing with that school district. So that's, we don't have those. Something else that people have to file in Texas. In Texas, officers of the state government, appointed board members for state government boards, and executive directors of state agencies all have to file these personal financial statements. They are public and available at our office, but they are not available online. So you have to come see it, or you have to make an open records request. So, and again, that's statutory, that's Texas law. So it's available, but if you're looking on the website, you're not going to see it. And then the big one that we can't tell you is whether a sworn complaint has or has not been filed against a person. Now, the way it works in Texas is our biggest enforcement arm is people. Any resident of Texas can file a sworn complaint with us alleging that a violation of a law in our jurisdiction has occurred, and then our enforcement staff looks into it. It can go to the commission, there could be hearing. They're subject to penalties if it's found that there was a violation. Up until a violation is found by the commission, so that there has already been a hearing and the commission has found a violation that is neither technical nor de minimis, then there can be what we call an open order. And open orders are on our website. But if it's something that's considered a technical violation, then even if the commission finds a violation, it's still confidential. So an example of that is something I saw the other day where a person had clearly transposed two numbers. And it was just one of those, when you looked at it, it was an obvious typo. Now, it was a violation, technically, but it was the sort of thing that the commission said, this is a technical error, and there wasn't a public order on that. So people aren't, held publicly accountable for those things. But we do have open orders on our website. So these are the people who have actually been found by the commission to have violated something. And on that search bar, you can search by name and kind of pull up everybody, all the complaints against a person. You can also search in the top search bar where it says enhanced by Google. That search bar, you can search for like the statute number. and that will pull up the, it will pull up a lot of things, but it will also pull up the open orders finding a violation on that statute. So there are a lot of ways to pull things up. But when you call us and you say, hey, how many sworn complaints have you had against this guy? The information that we're able to get you is just what we already have out there. So a lot of it is confidential. We can't tell you about sworn complaints that were filed and then it turns out that there was no violation. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we can't tell you everything about it. And then it's got to be pretty far along in the process before it's public. So that's kind of the overview. Does anybody have any questions?
Hi, I'm Jasper Scher with the Houston Chronicle, based here in Austin. Sometimes it can be useful to search for whether people who work at a specific company or have a certain employer have donated to a candidate, and this also goes at the local level too. I found that frequently, donors don't actually list their employer, or they'll put something super vague like the industry that they work in. And I'm just wondering, realizing I don't actually know what the law or the regulations say about what is required, and is there any sort of enforcement mechanism for requiring that? And also, as someone who has spent an extensive amount of time on the TEC side, I appreciate what you guys do. So, thank you.
Thank you. So only certain candidates are required to disclose donor employer information. I believe it's generally officers of the state government. So say the county commissioners in Harris County don't even have to. And then when you sort of drill down further than that, it's kind of who is your employer. And that can be, sometimes people can be employed by one person, but also self-employed, or, they just put a company or things like that. If it's completely non-responsive and it's required, somebody can file a sworn complaint. And that is a violation, but that would be on the person with the duty to report. So not the donor, but the candidate, but it's only certain candidates who have to disclose that information, and it's only above that itemization threshold where you actually have to provide information about the person making the donation.
Hi, Joseph with the state newspaper in Columbia, South Carolina. A lot of times we'll report on the quarterly reports. Here's how much candidates A, B, and C raised, how many donors they had. Are there any stories that you think reporters overlook when they look at the fundraising numbers when they come out?
Boy, that's an interesting question, and I don't know how to answer that. I don't think so. I think the information's out there, and kind of how much is getting raised is important, and I think people are also interested in sort of how many donors does that amount represent. But again, that's kind of Texas specific because people can give an unlimited amount, so it is interesting. I think don't overlook the political committees because some of them are really associated with the actual candidate. So if you look at the candidates' reports, there won't be a whole lot. They might have a committee that they do all of their fundraising through. But then again, sometimes, again, in Texas, you don't have to have an affiliated committee, so you can just do it all through a candidate report, and that's fine too. So it's just, but some people just choose to sort of run it all through a committee, and that's an important thing to look for.
My name is Samia. I'm from Cal Matters. I had a couple of beginner questions. Is there a limit on how many super PACs can support a specific candidate? And a second question was whether there's anything specific to know about union lobbying, like any differences in the forms or disclosures or anything.
Okay, so the union question is easy because unions are treated the same as corporations in Texas. I don't know about elsewhere, but yes. So when we say, these corporate contributions are prohibited, it's in Texas the law is corporations and labor unions. It's like it's a phrase. They use it. Now, as far as a limit to super PACs, not that I'm aware of, but now I'm trying to think, is there a reason why that would be? But see, in Texas, things don't have to be as creatively structured because there aren't contribution limits. So people tend not to have to bend, and twist and turn and create things. The only reason that they might create entities is that, it can be an entity that's not a PAC, that doesn't have to disclose too much information, and it's about the disclosure, but it's not getting around limits. So if that answers your question.
Hi, I'm Kate. I'm from Salt Lake, PA. I was wondering for both of you guys if you could talk a little bit about your relation. I'm not sure if you have a relationship with each other as sources, but just generally like your relationship with the media and how reporters come to you and ask questions, and sort of just what I like in my experience when I've gone in person to election offices and such for county election directors, they're much more willing to talk with me in person than over email or over the phone. So just sort of your relationship with that. And then for Patrick, sort of similarly, but also you talked a little bit about when asking politicians like hard questions about money and stuff like that. I feel like that's something that I'm trying to work at more, where just asking more direct questions about these more sensitive topics. So just any like tips and your approach towards that generally would be great. Thank you.
Sure. You want to go first?
Sure. Well, I hope that we have a good relationship with the media. I mean, we do try to prioritize their questions because I consider the agency, it's about disclosure, it's about sunlight, it's public information sort of agency. That being said, I won't deny that maybe sometimes it does take longer to get a call back than people would like. And, I'm just going to go ahead and say to y'all, don't be shy about calling back, especially when you're on a deadline. I know one time it was when we were temporarily between general counsels, and I was, sort of doing the general counsel work at the same time as doing the executive director work, and I just sort of, a phone call fell through the cracks, and I called him back a couple of days later. He was really irritated. But I thought, you're a reporter, get on the horn, instead of just sitting at home and stewing, like we were in a personal relationship, just call me again. And I don't think that government agency people are offended when you, put your question at the top of the inbox, because a lot of people are dealing, with small staffs, and it's kind of like, hey, thanks for the reminder. And coming to the office, people sometimes still do that. The only people that actually ever come to our office actually are usually reporters, and they want to see those personal financial statements. And it can be irritating to them because we hand redact to them because there's certain information that can't go out, and we don't have the technological capabilities to just have it automatically done. So sometimes you have to wait. So again, I would like our service to be even better, but hopefully we have a good relationship, because I want us to answer the questions, because I think that that's what we're there for.
Yeah, I would say we have a very positive relationship. Usually when I deal with the TEC, it's for one of two reasons. Usually I have a question about, maybe why a report isn't downloading yet or hasn't posted yet. They're usually very helpful in clarifying that and helping me understand what may be going on, whether it's like an issue on their end or just an issue with the campaign not filing it or filing it incorrectly. That's one way we interact. Another way is just the TEC is usually helpful, helping me understand different rules and regulations where I need a little additional clarity. They don't in my experience, the TC doesn't, comment on specific cases. But if, I call them and explain I'm working on a story about this specific case, again, they won't comment on the specific case, but they'll be able to, kind of point to the relevant statutes and help me, basically give me the tools I have to be able to report on that specific case without them specifically commenting on it. So they've been very helpful. I mean, I would say the big thing is like a good way to get, campaigns sometimes to loosen up is to, about these matters is to like try to get them first to talk about their opponents' finances. Like they have people, campaigns love talking about their opponents' finances more than they like talking about theirs often. And so sometimes like at a, if I'm watching like a really big race after, a quarterly filing deadline, I'll reach out to like a source on one campaign and say, hey, did you see anything interesting in your opponent's report? Like, any interesting donors, any interesting expenses, anything stand out to you? And sometimes you can get good stories that way by, playing the campaigns off one another. But in general, that'll also just open them up sometimes to talk more about, their own finances. So yeah, always, you can always try to play them against each other and appeal to their sense of competition and adversary.
Hi, Jessie Opoyan with the Capital Times in Madison, Wisconsin. I feel like when I do my campaign finance stories, I tend to get kind of stuck in a rut of just like, here are the top donors and just like really kind of nuts and bolts stuff. And the last time I was doing it, one of our like entertainment editors was like, why should I care about this? Like, why does this matter? Why do we do these stories? So I'm wondering, Patrick, if you have more examples of like fun, some of your favorite, I guess, campaign finance stories that you've done, and or if you have creative ways to think about, I guess, looking for stories when you're looking through the reports.
You should ask the entertainment editor the same thing. Why do we do your stories?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to, think about the different power centers that develop around these super PACs. And one of my favorite stories, are these super PACs, these outside groups. One of the most interesting stories I did was after the 2016 presidential race. I did kind of like a campaign finance post-mortem on Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, which had this like huge network of super PACs that cropped up around it with donors who'd given $5-6 million apiece. It was, for a presidential super PAC, it was kind of, I don't want to say a new frontier, but it was a lot of money. And so, I obviously you want to look for where the big money is. You want to look for who's behind that, what their interests may be in individual candidates, and how like these campaign finance groups can become their own, they can almost supplant campaigns as like power centers and places, where actual campaign activity is happening. And I think that in that Cruz campaign that happened with some of the super PACs in some ways. And so that's one way to make it sexy is to focus on how these groups kind of become their own power centers and how the big donors are in charge of those groups and the different consultants they employ. So yeah, does that answer the question a little bit? Okay.
Hi, my name is Brenna. I'm with Bloomberg in Arizona. This is probably more for Patrick. I'm wondering, I'm at a point right now where I can access reports and kind of generally read them, but sometimes I don't. I have questions about what certain things mean, or like if something's actually a red flag, or if I'm understanding it. And as someone who is just a single person bureau, do you have recommendations for kind of types of sources or categories of sources that we can talk to just to kind of parse through what some of that stuff means, or if they're seeing red flags, and maybe not even to quote, but just as kind of background?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different kinds of sources I think could help you understand those reports. They're obviously the campaigns. Sometimes campaigns freeze up when you ask questions about that stuff, so they're not always reliable as sources of information there. There's the staff at whatever the reporting authority is, like we have the Texas Ethics Commission here in Texas, and like I said, they've always been helpful in terms of just helping me understand things, if not directly commenting. They don't directly comment on them, but they help me understand them. And then there's, there are groups in DC and sometimes at the state level where either think tanks or interest groups that their specialty is campaign finance. And so we have a couple groups here in Austin actually. They're pretty small groups, but the people involved in them are very well versed in campaign finance. It can help you understand the reports. I think one of them is called Public Citizen, another one is called Texans for Public Justice. In DC, you have, I think it's the Campaign Legal Center maybe. And so you can call those places, and those places honestly are usually the places where you're more likely to get someone who can not only help you understand, but also speak on the record about some of these issues. And so those are the three kind of buckets of sources I would think of in terms of helping understand the reports.
Well, thank you both so much for your time. Thank you.